On October 24th, 1994, the world learned terrible news. The 41st President of the United States, Ronald Wilson Reagan, had been diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease. A handwritten letter to the American people, trembling handwriting, words about beginning a journey that would lead him to the sunset of his life. Official medicine spoke of progressive neurodegenerative pathology, incurable and merciless. But what if this letter was the final act in a grand theatrical production directed by the very people he had once trusted most? What if the diagnosis was merely a cover for a far more sinister plan to eliminate an inconvenient witness? 3 months before the public announcement of the diagnosis, Reagan's close associates began noticing strange behaviors in the former president that didn't fit the clinical picture of dementia. Nancy Reagan later told reporters how Ronnie could forget the name of an old friend, but reproduce with photographic accuracy details of secret negotiations from 20 years ago. He would forget whether he had eaten breakfast in the morning, but remember every word from conversations with CIA Director William Casey about the Nicaraguan Contras. These memories surfaced suddenly, as if someone was flipping a switch in his brain, allowing access to certain memory files only at strictly controlled moments. Nancy described these episodes as windows of clarity, but their selectivity suggested the process was far from random. Fellow Americans, while certain powerful figures in Washington continue their efforts to conceal the truth, and you know this perfectly well yourselves, we remain committed to uncovering the facts for you. To stay informed, please subscribe to this channel and let us know in the comments which state you're watching from. Thank you. Dr. James Whitmore, the Reagan family's personal physician for 15 years, was stunned by the speed of symptom development. In his private notes, which became public only after his death in 2007, he noted, "Alzheimer's disease develops over years, gradually, destroying neural connections. What's happening to Ronald looks more like selective memory loss, as if someone is carefully erasing certain areas of his recollections while leaving others untouched." Whitmore also mentioned mysterious visits from unknown colleagues from federal medical institutions who insisted on changing the former president's treatment regimen, including experimental drugs supposedly to slow the disease's progression. Particularly alarming was an incident in the ranch library in late August 1994, when Reagan suddenly began telling his assistant details of the operation to supply weapons to Iran through third countries. He spoke clearly and coherently, citing figures and names that never appeared in official congressional reports on the Iran-Contra scandal. He mentioned secret accounts in Swiss banks, named amounts in millions of dollars, listed names of high-ranking officials who were officially never connected to this operation. Reagan spoke of meetings in White House basements, code words, and communication systems with Contra field commanders. But when the assistant asked him to repeat the information, the former president looked at him with blank eyes and asked, "What are you talking about? I never told you anything like that." An hour later, he couldn't remember his interlocutor's name. Michael Reagan, son from the first marriage, began secretly recording conversations with his father after he described in detail the scheme for financing Contras through drug sales, then forgot an hour later that he even had a son named Michael. It wasn't just strange, it was frightening, Michael later told independent journalists. Dad would talk about things that could destroy the reputation of half of Washington, then erase what he said from his memory. Michael described how his father told him about secret CIA cocaine production laboratories in Central America, about bribing members of Congress, and how drugs were smuggled into American cities to finance Contra operations. These revelations were so detailed and compromising that Michael seriously feared for his own safety. Patty Davis, Reagan's daughter, remembered the last clear conversation with her father in September 1994, a month before the diagnosis announcement. Ronald told her that they had come to him with an offer to help forget some episodes of his presidency in exchange for a peaceful old age. "Dad told me then, 'Patty, if something happens to me, if I start forgetting, know that it's not a disease. It's the price for knowing too much.' I thought he was paranoid then. Now I'm not so sure." Patty also remembered how her father spoke to her about the existence of secret documents hidden in a safe place that could blow up the whole system if they fell into the hands of honest journalists. On March 23, 1993, in an underground conference room on the 7th floor of CIA headquarters in Langley, 6 men gathered whose names never appeared in official meeting protocols. The meeting was scheduled for 7 in the evening when most of the staff had already left the building. Guards received instructions not to register the participants' presence in visitor logs. On the table lay a single folder marked Top Secret with the code designation Project Memory. This was the beginning of an operation that would forever change the fate of America's 41st president. Deputy Director for Operations Robert Gates opened the meeting with words that would torment his conscience for the rest of his life. "Gentlemen, we have a problem." The former president is becoming increasingly talkative. Photographs of Reagan at various public events appeared on screen, showing him talking with journalists and former colleagues. Each photo was marked with the date and annotation about what inappropriate topics the former president touched upon in conversations. Special attention was paid to his conversations with Bob Woodward from the Washington Post and several independent researchers digging through 80s archives. Reagan knows too many details of operations that officially never existed, Gates continued, leafing through documents. Head of Psychological Operations, Colonel James Harrison presented a detailed analysis of Reagan's statements over the past 6 months. In his report, he noted the growing tendency of the former president toward inadvertent revelations about Iran-Contra scandal details that went far beyond what was officially acknowledged by the Tower Commission. He mentions specific weapon delivery dates that didn't appear in any open document, names intermediaries whose existence only we know, Harrison read from his notes. Particularly alarming was the fact that Reagan had begun talking about the CIA's role in drug trafficking to finance Contras, an operation whose existence was categorically denied by all official sources. CIA Medical Service Director Dr. William Collins presented results of secret psychological profiling of the former president conducted without his knowledge over the previous months. Reagan is in a state of post-presidential depression, making him more inclined toward revelations and wanting to clear his conscience before history, Collins explained. Our analysts believe that in the next 2 to 3 years, the probability of serious exposures is over 70%. The doctor also noted that Reagan's age made him less cautious in his statements, and his growing desire to preserve his place in history could lead to attempts to tell the truth about his presidency. The most ominous moment of the meeting was the presentation by the Special Operations Chief, whose identity remains classified to this day. The man, known only by the codename Doctor, presented the Oblivion Operation Plan, a multi-stage scheme to neutralize the Reagan problem without using traditional elimination methods. Physical elimination of a former president would create more problems than it would solve, he explained in a monotone voice. We need a more elegant solution. The medical community has been discussing for several years the possible connection between presidential stress and the development of neurodegenerative diseases in old age. The plan involved gradually introducing experimental drugs affecting memory under the guise of preventive treatment. Doctor demonstrated results of secret experiments with chemical compounds capable of causing selective memory loss. We can erase specific memories while leaving other brain functions relatively intact, he explained, showing graphs and medical data. The process will look like natural development of Alzheimer's disease, but we'll be able to control which memories disappear first. Special attention was given to developing drugs that would primarily affect brain areas responsible for storing memories about political activities and secret operations, while leaving personal and family memories relatively untouched to maintain the appearance of natural disease. The meeting concluded with adoption of a resolution to begin the preparatory phase of Oblivion Operation. A decision was made to infiltrate an agent into Reagan's inner circle under the guise of medical personnel, and to involve corrupt doctors to make the necessary diagnosis at the appropriate time. Gentlemen, we're protecting not only our service's reputation, but America's national security, Gates summarized. History must not learn the truth about what really happened in the 80s. All meeting materials were destroyed immediately after conclusion, and participants signed additional non-disclosure agreements under threat of treason charges. Dr. Carlos Martinez never planned to become part of a conspiracy against a former president of the United States. A Harvard Medical School graduate, specialist in neurodegenerative diseases with an impeccable reputation, he built his career on principles of scientific honesty and the Hippocratic Oath. His private clinic in Beverly Hills served Hollywood elite and the political establishment, while his scientific work on Alzheimer's disease was published in the world's most prestigious medical journals. But in April 1994, people entered his life who forced him to reconsider all the principles that had guided him throughout 25 years of medical practice. The first warning bell was the appearance at his clinic of a new patient, a mysterious businessman named Robert Stone, who introduced himself as a medical technology consultant. Stone came with complaints about memory problems, but during examination, asked strange questions about Alzheimer's diagnosis methods and possibilities of medicinal influence on remembering and forgetting processes. "Doctor, tell me, is it theoretically possible to artificially induce dementia symptoms?" he asked during one consultation. Martinez answered that such research is conducted only under laboratory conditions and strictly controlled by ethics committees. Stone carefully wrote down every word and asked for details about drugs affecting neurotransmitters to be repeated. A week after Stone's last visit, Martinez received a call from someone named Mr. Johnson, who introduced himself as a Department of Health employee and suggested meeting to discuss an important government project. The meeting took place at a small restaurant in Santa Monica, where Johnson, an elegant middle-aged man in an expensive suit, revealed to the doctor a completely different picture of his activities. "Dr. Martinez, we know about your outstanding work in neurodegenerative diseases. Your country needs your services to solve a delicate national security problem," he began the conversation. Johnson explained that he worked in a structure dealing with protecting state interests, and that a certain high-ranking state figure was creating a national security threat with his uncontrolled statements. Martinez initially refused to participate in any questionable operations, citing medical ethics and principles of medical practice. But Johnson was well prepared for such a reaction. He pulled from his briefcase a thick folder with documents and photographs that made the doctor turn pale. These were materials about his clinic's tax violations, photographs of his secret meetings with a senator's wife, documents about unregistered income from private practice, and compromising correspondence with pharmaceutical companies about testing experimental drugs without regulatory approval. "Doctor, we don't want to use this information against you," Johnson said softly, "but your cooperation will help us solve the problem in a civilized way. The alternative could be quite unpleasant for both you and your family." The plan Johnson presented was carefully thought out and seemed relatively harmless at first glance. The doctor was to conduct a medical examination of a high-ranking patient and diagnose progressive dementia. "The patient is indeed experiencing memory problems," Johnson explained. "You just need to confirm what's already happening naturally and perhaps speed up the process with special medications." He handed the doctor a sealed envelope with detailed instructions for using experimental drugs that were supposed to intensify symptoms of forgetfulness and disorientation. The drugs were disguised as regular nootropics and vitamin complexes often prescribed to elderly patients to maintain cognitive functions. The most shocking revelation was that the patient turned out to be Ronald Reagan himself. Johnson explained that the former president was indeed beginning to show signs of cognitive impairment, but these impairments were selective. He forgot daily trivia but retained clear memory of events from his presidency that posed a threat to national security. "Your task is to accelerate the natural brain aging process and direct it in the right direction," Johnson instructed. "Reagan must forget certain episodes of his presidency, but retain the ability to function daily long enough for the diagnosis to look natural." The doctor was provided with detailed memory maps of the former president, indicating which memories should disappear first. Martinez understood that by agreeing to this proposal, he was crossing all conceivable ethical boundaries of the medical profession. But the compromising material in Johnson's hands was too serious, and the threats too specific. "Doctor, "We're not asking you to kill the patient," Johnson emphasized. "We're asking you to help him forget what causes pain to both himself and the country." Isn't that mercy? At the end of the meeting, Martinez received the first installment of his fee, $50,000 in cash, and a promise of complete removal of all claims against his activities after completing the assignment. The contract was concluded on May 24, 1994, the day of the first consultation with Ronald Reagan. Leaving the restaurant, Dr. Martinez understood that his life had changed forever. In his medical bag lay drugs that were supposed to turn one of the most influential people in American history into a helpless old man incapable of remembering secrets that could shake the foundations of the country's political system. This was the moment when a doctor who had sworn to do no harm became a tool in the hands of those willing to take any measures to preserve state secrets. On November 15, 1985, in the Oval Office of the White House, a meeting took place that forever changed Ronald Reagan's understanding of the price of presidential power. Behind the massive oak desk sat CIA Director William Casey, National Security Advisor Robert McFarlane, and Colonel Oliver North. On the table lay a folder marked "For President Only," containing details of an operation that officially never existed. "Mr. President, what we're about to tell you must not leave these office walls," Casey began, opening documents that would become a nightmare for all present years later. Reagan listened attentively, not suspecting that every word spoken that day would become a potential death sentence for his future. Operation Phoenix was the brainchild of American intelligence's darkest minds, a scheme so complex and cynical that even professionals hardened by the Cold War sometimes doubted its ethics. Casey methodically explained to the president the mechanism of triple play. Selling weapons to Iran through Israeli intermediaries was supposed to not only ensure the release of American hostages in Lebanon, but also create a secret fund for financing Nicaraguan Contras, bypassing congressional prohibition. But this was only the visible part of the iceberg. The operation's real goal was to create a global black financing network for CIA operations that would never pass through official approval and control channels. Reagan recorded key details in his personal diary, not suspecting that these entries would someday become the most dangerous documents in American political history. But the most shocking revelation was the account of the operation's narcotic component. Colonel North, nervously shuffling documents, explained to the president how the CIA established control over cocaine smuggling routes from South America to the United States. "Mr. President, we didn't create drug trafficking. We only redirected existing flows in the right direction," he justified. Part of the proceeds from drug sales in American cities went to purchasing weapons for Contras, while another part went to creating secret funds for financing agent networks worldwide. Reagan was shocked by the operation's scale. Hundreds of millions of dollars passed through CIA-controlled banks in Panama, the Cayman Islands, and Switzerland. Each transaction was carefully documented and stored in safes, accessible to only a few people in the world. In his personal safe in the White House residence, Reagan kept copies of documents that could destroy not only his administration, but undermine American people's trust in the presidency institution for decades ahead. Among them were bank statements from Phoenix operation accounts, personal letters from Contra commanders thanking him for drug supplies, photographs of weapons warehouses at secret CIA bases in Honduras and Costa Rica. Particularly compromising were audio recordings of conversations with cartel leaders discussing cooperation details between American intelligence and drug barons. One recording captured Reagan's own voice, approving a plan to use drug trafficking to finance anti-communist forces in Central America. Reagan also knew about the existence of secret CIA laboratories, producing synthetic drugs used both for additional income and for conducting mind control experiments. Director Casey told him about a new generation MK Ultra program developing chemical substances capable of influencing people's memory and behavior. "These developments will help us work more effectively with prisoners and defectors in the future," Casey explained, showing the president test results on volunteers from federal prison inmates. Reagan saw video recordings of experiments where people were injected with various drugs and observed for changes in behavior and memory capacity. Some substances caused partial or complete memory loss, others made people more suggestible and cooperative. The president also possessed information about the role of high-ranking politicians and businessmen in these operations. His safe contained dossiers on dozens of congressmen, senators, and governors who received drug money through front organizations and charitable foundations. There were documents about how major banks laundered drug dollars, how airlines provided planes for transporting drugs and weapons, how judges received bribes for lenient sentences for arrested couriers. Reagan understood that this information made him simultaneously the most powerful and most vulnerable person in the country. Each document in his safe was a potential bomb capable of destroying hundreds of people's careers and undermining the foundations of the American political system. The most dangerous secret was the existence of the silence list, a document containing names of people eliminated for attempting to expose Phoenix Operation. The list included journalists who died in car accidents after beginning investigations into CIA connections with drug cartels, witnesses who died of sudden heart attacks on the eve of giving testimony, politicians who committed suicide after receiving compromising materials. Reagan knew this list continued to grow and that his own name could appear on it if he ever tried to tell the truth about what happened in the 80s. This knowledge turned the last years of his presidency into constant balancing on the edge of catastrophe, where every careless word could be his last. Nancy Reagan always prided herself on her intuition and ability to read people like an open book. 43 years of marriage to Ronald taught her to recognize every change in his mood, every tone of voice, every gesture. Therefore, when in June 1994 her husband began demonstrating strange memory lapses, she immediately sensed something was wrong. Not because the symptoms were too severe, on the contrary, they seemed too selective, too convenient. Ronnie could forget where he left his glasses but remember with photographic precision Panama bank account numbers that no one should have known. He got confused with old friends' names, but infallibly called CIA operation code words from 20 years ago. The first serious warning bell rang during a family dinner in July when Ronnie suddenly began talking about Condor Operation in South America, detailedly describing methods of eliminating political opponents. He spoke with such clarity and precision that Nancy involuntarily wrote some details on a napkin. But half an hour later, when she asked him to repeat the story, Ronald looked at her with sincere bewilderment and asked, "What are you talking about, dear?" "I didn't tell you anything like that." This strange pattern, clear, detailed memories of secret operations replaced by complete oblivion, made Nancy think that her husband's memory was being subjected to some external influence. She began secretly recording all his statements on a dictaphone she carried in her purse. Nancy also noticed that Ronald's memory lapses had a clear pattern. He forgot precisely those episodes that could compromise high-ranking officials or reveal secret government operations. Meanwhile, personal memories, family stories, and even acting professional skills remained untouched. Particularly suspicious was how Ronnie instantly forgot his revelations about the Iran-Contra scandal, but perfectly remembered all details of his films from 40 years ago. "This isn't a disease," Nancy wrote in her diary on July 23rd. "Diseases don't work so selectively. Someone is purposefully erasing certain memories from his mind." She began studying medical literature on Alzheimer's disease and found many inconsistencies in her husband's symptoms. The turning point came on the night of August 14th, when Nancy woke to the sound of her husband's voice in the study. Ronnie was talking on the phone with someone he called doctor, and the conversation was about dosage adjustment and enhancing effects on temporal lobes. Nancy quietly crept to the door and heard her husband complaining. "The drugs work too abruptly. Yesterday I forgot Margaret Thatcher's name, and today I suddenly remembered all the details of the Grenada operation. You promised the process would be gradual." The voice on the other end was unfamiliar to Nancy, but she clearly heard words about selective impact on the hippocampus and the need for precise neurochemical balance adjustment. This overheard conversation finally convinced her that her husband's illness was a carefully planned staging. Nancy began her own investigation, using connections established over years of life in political circles. She turned to Dr. Elizabeth Hamilton, a family physician who had observed Ronald for 15 years and knew all the features of his health. Nancy, what's happening to Ronald doesn't resemble any form of dementia I've seen in 30 years of practice, Dr. Hamilton confessed during a secret meeting in her office. Alzheimer's disease affects memory chaotically, first destroying short-term memory, then moving to long-term. Your husband shows the reverse picture with obvious signs of selectivity. Dr. Hamilton also noted suspicious changes in Ronald's blood tests, the presence of unknown chemical compounds not included in any officially prescribed medications. Nancy made her most terrible discovery when she searched her husband's personal belongings, looking for confirmation of her suspicions. In a secret compartment of his desk, she found a vial of unmarked pills and a note with usage instructions written in unfamiliar handwriting. Take 2 pills morning and evening to enhance forgetting effect. If unwanted memories arise, increase dosage to 3 pills, the note read. Nearby lay a list of topics and memories to be erased first. Phoenix operation details, CIA agent names in Central America, secret account banking details, contents of negotiations with cartel leaders. This list was signed by the code name Doctor, the same person Ronnie had spoken with on the phone that night. Nancy realized her husband had become a victim of a sophisticated conspiracy aimed at silencing him forever. She also understood that any attempt to expose this conspiracy would endanger not only her life, but her children's lives. They turned my husband into a living corpse, she wrote in her diary on August 28th. He's alive, but his memory, his personality, his ability to tell the truth is slowly being killed from within. Nancy decided to play the role of a devoted wife, caring for a sick husband while secretly documenting everything happening, hoping this information would someday help restore justice. She began creating a secret archive of recordings, photographs, and documents, which she hid in a bank vault under a fictitious name, not suspecting that she was already under 24-hour surveillance. On September 1, 1994, a new Security Service employee appeared at the Reagan House, Michael Collins, a 35-year-old Special Forces veteran with an impeccable service record and recommendations from the highest-ranking Secret Service officials. Officially, he was hired to strengthen former president's security in connection with increased threats from political radicals. Collins gave the impression of an ideal bodyguard, physically strong, silent, professional, with a sharp gaze and quick reaction. But his real mission had little to do with protecting Ronald Reagan. Agent Collins was a psychological operations specialist, graduate of a secret CIA program on hidden consciousness influence methods, and his task was not to guard the former president, but to control his every step, every word, every thought. Collins received a detailed dossier on the Reagan family, including psychological profiles of each family member, their habits, fears, weaknesses, and pressure points. Special attention was given to studying Ronald's daily routine, his food preferences, social circle, and conversation topics that could provoke unwanted memories. His instructions clearly stated, Operation Goal, ensure complete control over information flow around the subject. No one should hear compromising information about 80s government operations from Reagan. To accomplish this task, Collins was equipped with the most modern surveillance and psychological influence, means disguised as ordinary household items and communication devices. One of the main control tools was a hidden audio monitoring system that Collins installed throughout the house under the guise of security system modernization. Microphones were built into phones, televisions, even picture frames in the former president's study. Every conversation, every Reagan monologue was recorded and immediately transmitted to a processing center where analysts identified potentially dangerous statements and developed neutralization strategies. When Ronald began talking about secret operations, Collins received a signal through a hidden earpiece and immediately intervened in the conversation, diverting the former president's attention or creating situations that interrupted unwanted revelations. These interventions looked completely natural. Sudden doorbell ring, urgent radio message, unexpected request for help. Collins also used subconscious suggestion methods he studied as part of the new generation MK Ultra program. He carried a special device emitting low-frequency sound waves inaudible to human ear but affecting specific brain areas. When Reagan began remembering unwanted episodes, Collins turned on the generator, which caused the former president headaches, nausea, or sudden drowsiness, forcing him to stop his story and rest. "These attacks always start when Dad talks about work," Patty Davis complained to her mother. "It's as if his brain refuses to remember certain things." Collins also regularly sprayed aerosol containing chemical substances affecting memory formation and reproduction processes in Reagan's study. A particularly cynical control method was using the trust Ronald felt toward his guard. Collins masterfully played the role of a devoted protector, caring for the former president's health and safety. He regularly offered Reagan vitamin cocktails and energy supplements that actually contained drugs enhancing the main memory-affecting medication's effects. "Mr. President, this drink will help you maintain mental clarity," he said, serving a glass of liquid containing the latest developments of military chemists on selective neurotransmitter influence. Reagan trustingly accepted these medicines, not suspecting that each sip brought him closer to complete memory loss about the most important events of his presidency. Collins also controlled all visitors to the Reagan house, carefully checking their biographies and visit purposes. Journalists, writers, researchers who might ask uncomfortable questions about the 80s received polite refusals under the pretext of the former president's poor health. Old friends and Reagan associates who might provoke unwanted memories were gradually excluded from communication under various pretexts. "The doctor doesn't recommend Mr. President worrying about outsiders," Collins explained, blocking meeting attempts with people who knew the truth about past events. He created an information cocoon around Reagan where the former president could only communicate with people who posed no threat to operation secrecy. The cruelest aspect of Collins's activity was psychological pressure on Reagan family members. He subtly hinted to Nancy that any attempts to reveal the truth about her husband's condition could lead to accidents involving their children and grandchildren. "Mrs. Reagan, your husband needs peace and treatment," he said in a soft but threatening tone. "Any interference with the therapy process could have unpredictable consequences not only for his health but for the entire family's safety." Collins regularly demonstrated his awareness of the Reagan children and grandchildren's plans and movements, making it clear they were under constant surveillance. This intimidation tactic forced the family to remain silent, even when they clearly saw something unnatural happening to Ronald. Collins turned the former president's house into a prison where every step was controlled, every word recorded, and any resistance attempt immediately suppressed. On September 28, 1994, a secret meeting of 5 doctors who should never have been in the same room took place at Mayo Medical Center in Rochester. Dr. Carlos Martinez, neurologist from Beverly Hills, Dr. Richard Steinberg, psychiatrist from Johns Hopkins, Dr. Susan Miller, medical documentation specialist, Dr. James Corrin, radiologist with 30 years' experience, and Dr. Margaret Wilson, federal-level pathologist. Each received an envelope with compromising materials about their professional activities and an offer impossible to refuse. Their task was creating an impeccable Alzheimer's medical history for a patient who was actually becoming a victim of the most sophisticated medical conspiracy in American political history. The medical document falsification operation began with preparing a false symptom development history that was supposed to explain the sudden appearance of dementia signs in Ronald Reagan. Dr. Martinez received the task of reviewing all the former president's medical records for the past 10 years and discovering early signs of cognitive impairment allegedly unnoticed earlier. Using modern computer document processing technologies, he made changes to dated records, adding mentions of forgetfulness, disorientation, and concentration difficulties. These fake records were skillfully integrated into original documents, creating an illusion of gradual disease development over several years. Special attention was given to ensuring symptoms didn't look too sharp or suspicious for future researchers. Dr. Steinberg took on creating a psychiatric profile that was supposed to explain Reagan's behavior features as manifestations of progressive dementia. He developed a detailed disease development scheme according to which the former president first began experiencing short-term memory problems, then had difficulties recognizing faces, and then memories of professional activities began disappearing. This scheme was specifically designed to explain why Reagan forgot precisely those events that could compromise the government while retaining memories of family life and acting career. Disease often first affects brain areas responsible for the most stressful and traumatic memories, Steinberg wrote in his conclusions, creating a pseudoscientific justification for selective memory loss. The most complex part of the operation was creating fake medical examination results that were supposed to confirm the diagnosis at a physiological level. Dr. Koren used his access to magnetic resonance imaging equipment to create a series of brain scans demonstrating changes in tissues characteristic of Alzheimer's disease. He took real brain scans of other patients with confirmed dementia and, using computer processing, overlaid them on Reagan's brain images, creating convincing evidence of degenerative processes. These fake tomograms were dated to different periods, creating an illusion of progressive brain condition deterioration over several months. Koren also falsified positron emission tomography results, showing decreased metabolic activity in brain areas responsible for memory and cognitive functions. Dr. Miller handled coordinating all documentation and ensuring its legal impeccability. She created a complex system of cross-references between various medical documents, medical histories, test results, and specialist conclusions that made falsification virtually impossible to detect. Each document had correct seals, signatures, registration numbers, and dates corresponding to real event chronology. Miller also ensured all documents were entered into computer databases of various medical institutions, creating digital traces that would confirm their authenticity during any verification. She used her connections in medical archives nationwide to ensure consistency of all records and eliminate the possibility of discovering contradictions. Dr. Wilson prepared a post-mortem brain research plan that was supposed to finally confirm the Alzheimer's diagnosis and close all questions about his death cause. She developed a methodology that would allow her, if necessary, to artificially create characteristic dementia changes in brain tissues using special chemicals introduced into the body immediately before death. These substances would cause amyloid plaque and neurofibrillary tangle formation, main pathological signs of Alzheimer's disease. Wilson also prepared a histological research falsification plan that would allow her to present artificially created changes as results of natural disease development. Even if someone doubts the diagnosis during life, post-mortem research will put a final period to this question, she reported to her handlers. Operation Coordination was handled by a mysterious curator known to doctors only by the code name Archivist. He regularly held meetings checking forgery quality and making corrections to the operation plan. "Remember, gentlemen," he told conspiracy participants, "we're creating not just a medical legend, we're rewriting history. Every detail must be impeccable because our safety and the entire country's political system stability depend on it." The archivist also ensured all operation participants received generous rewards for their participation. Each doctor received from $500,000 to $1 million in cash, plus guarantees of protection from any legal consequences. In return, they signed non-disclosure agreements, violation of which was punishable not only by financial penalties, but physical elimination. Thus was created a medical mystification that was supposed to hide one of the most monstrous crimes against democracy in American history. On October 5, 1994, a man appeared at a small motel on Miami's outskirts who could change the course of American history. Eduardo Mendoza, former Nicaraguan Contra commander, 42 years old, with a face scarred by Soviet grenade fragments, flew to the United States with a single goal: to tell the truth about what really happened in Central American jungles in the 80s. In his battered briefcase lay documents, photographs, and audio recordings that could destroy not only Ronald Reagan's legacy, but undermine the American people's faith in their government's honesty. Mendoza knew details of operations about which officially no one had ever heard, and he had irrefutable evidence of the American president's direct participation in drug trafficking and illegal arms supplies. Mendoza contacted Miami Herald journalist Carmen Rodriguez through an intermediary in Florida's Nicaraguan community, sending her an encrypted message that he had explosive information about the Iran-Contra scandal. At their first meeting in a small cafe in Little Havana, he showed her a photograph of himself shaking hands with Ronald Reagan in the Oval Office in March 1986. Officially, such a meeting never took place, and the president's schedule that day showed only routine cabinet meetings. The president personally thanked me for successful operations intercepting cocaine caravans, Mendoza recounted, showing entries in his personal diary from those years. But he thanked me not for destroying drugs, but for redirecting them along new routes to American cities. Rodriguez was stunned by his account's detail and the amount of compromising documents. The most shocking evidence was an audio recording of a conversation between Mendoza and Colonel Oliver North made in June 1986 at a secret CIA base in Honduras. The tape clearly captured North's voice, explaining Contra operation details to the commander. Eduardo, the president personally approved the plan to use drug trafficking to finance our operations. We're not just turning a blind eye to cocaine trafficking, we're actively participating in it. North also mentioned the existence of secret cocaine refining laboratories built with CIA funds and operated by American chemists under the guise of fighting drugs. This 43-minute recording contained names of high-ranking officials, secret account banking details, and operation details that never appeared in official Iran-Contra Commission reports. Mendoza also possessed photographs of weapons and drug warehouses under joint CIA and Contra control. One photograph showed a hangar labeled humanitarian aid in English, but inside, instead of food and medicine, were tons of cocaine in packages bearing American symbols. We received cocaine from Colombian cartels, refined it in our laboratories, then shipped it to Los Angeles and Miami through planes officially delivering humanitarian aid, Mendoza explained. He also showed documents about payments to American pilots who transported drugs and a list of corrupt officials in various government departments who ensured smooth cargo passage through customs. According to him, the operation brought in about $500 million annually, funding weapon purchases and maintaining secret bases throughout Central America. However, the most dangerous evidence was recordings of Reagan's phone conversations with drug cartel leaders, which Mendoza secretly recorded on CIA instructions to monitor the operation. One tape captured the president's voice discussing drug supply details with the Medellin cartel chief in exchange for financing anti-communist forces in the region. Mr. President knew every operation detail, Mendoza claimed. He personally approved routes, supply volumes, and even cocaine prices. The former Contra commander also spoke about secret White House meetings where plans to expand drug trafficking to other regions and create a global network for financing CIA secret operations through prohibited substance trade were discussed. These revelations could not only destroy Reagan's reputation, but questioned the legitimacy of all American policy in Latin America. On October 7th, the day before the planned publication of Mendoza's interview in Miami Herald, the former Contra commander was found dead in his motel room. The official cause of death was listed as heart attack, but the pathologist conducting the autopsy discovered traces of a rare poison in Mendoza's blood that causes symptoms indistinguishable from natural cardiac arrest. All documents and recordings he brought disappeared from the room, and his laptop's hard drive was completely erased using professional methods. Carmen Rodriguez, who was supposed to publish his testimony, received an anonymous warning that continuing the investigation could be dangerous for her health and family safety. Mendoza died because he knew too much, she wrote in her diary. His death is a signal to all other witnesses. Silence is the price of survival. Eduardo Mendoza's story was never told to the American public, and his death became another link in the chain of mysterious deaths of people who could expose the truth about the dark operations of the 80s. In autumn 1994, Reagan's children began independently noticing alarming patterns in their father's behavior that didn't fit the official version of Alzheimer's disease development. Michael Reagan, the eldest son from the first marriage, was first to notice that his father's memory lapses had too clear logic. "Dad can forget my name but remembers Swiss bank account numbers," he told his brother Ron. "He forgets old friends' faces but reproduces conversations with CIA director from 20 years ago in detail." Michael found particularly suspicious that his father forgot his revelations immediately after making them, as if someone erased these memories in real time. He began secretly recording conversations with his father on a dictaphone, creating an archive of statements Reagan later refused to acknowledge. Patty Davis, daughter from the second marriage, noticed another oddity. Her father showed disease signs only in the presence of certain people, especially new guard Michael Collins and Dr. Carlos Martinez. "When Dad is alone with me or Mom, he's much clearer and more collected," she shared observations with brother Ron. "But when Collins or Dr. Martinez appears, he immediately starts looking confused and forgetful." Patty also noticed that after doctor visits, her father became unusually drowsy and disoriented, his speech becoming slurred for several hours. She began monitoring her father's medications and discovered some drugs not listed in any official prescriptions. When she asked Dr. Martinez about this, he evasively replied these were experimental means to slow disease progression. Ron Reagan Jr., the most skeptical of the children, conducted his own investigation of his father's medical history and discovered numerous inconsistencies in documents. Studying Ronald's medical records for the past 15 years, he found dementia symptom entries dated retroactively and inserted into existing documents. These entries are made with different ink and on paper that differs from other pages, Ron discovered, examining documents under a magnifying glass. Someone is trying to create an illusion that the disease developed gradually, though symptoms actually appeared suddenly. He also found online information about drugs his father was taking and learned some were experimental memory-affecting substances developed under military programs. The Reagan children's attempts to get a second medical opinion met organized resistance. When Michael tried to arrange a consultation with an independent neurologist from Stanford University, Dr. Martinez categorically prohibited any additional examinations, citing that they could traumatize the patient and accelerate disease progression. Agent Collins supported this position, adding that former president's security doesn't allow visits to other medical institutions. When Patty insisted on an independent specialist's home visit, the scheduled meeting was canceled at the last moment for national security reasons. All family attempts to access their father's complete medical records were blocked under the pretext of protecting confidential information about the former president's health. The situation changed dramatically when Reagan's children began receiving anonymous threats. The first warning came to Michael as a 2 a.m. phone call. An electronically distorted voice informed him that excessive curiosity about father's health could lead to problems with his children's health. A week later, Patty found an envelope in her mailbox with photographs of her children near school and a note. "Beautiful children. It would be sad if something happened to them because of mother's carelessness." Ron received a more sophisticated threat. Medical records of his own children were sent with notes about genetic predisposition to accidents. All threats were professionally composed and contained no direct demands, but the subtext was clear. Any attempts to expose the truth about their father's illness would endanger their children's and grandchildren's lives. The cruelest blow was discovering that all Reagan family members were under 24-hour surveillance. Michael noticed the same people appearing near him in different city locations. His phones were tapped, and mail was opened and resealed. Patty discovered microtransmitters in her house disguised as ordinary interior items, and Ron found a GPS tracker on his car. When they tried to file an FBI complaint about surveillance, they were told that former president's family is under special protection by intelligence services, and that surveillance was conducted exclusively for their safety. The agent taking the complaint hinted that any public statements about surveillance problems could be interpreted as ingratitude for provided protection and result in security measures review. The family's resistance was finally broken by the 3-day disappearance of Reagan's grandson, Michael's 8-year-old son. The boy vanished on his way home from school, and police couldn't find any traces. After 72 hours, the child returned home on his own, not remembering where he had been or what happened to him. Medical examination showed traces of sedatives in his blood and an injection mark on his arm. No law enforcement agency could explain the disappearance, but the next day, Michael received a phone call. "Your son returned healthy and unharmed. Next time we might not be so magnanimous." After this incident, Reagan's children stopped all attempts to investigate their father's condition and publicly supported the official version of his Alzheimer's disease. They understood that silence was the only way to protect their children from an organization ready to take any measures to preserve its secrets. In underground laboratories of the Dietrich Research Center in Maryland, in 1993, development was completed of a drug destined to change the fate of America's 41st president. The substance under code name Nimazine-7 resulted from 20 years of research under the new generation MK Ultra program aimed at creating chemical compounds capable of selectively affecting memory formation and reproduction processes. Dr. Elizabeth Harrington, the project's lead neurochemist, later confessed in her secret memoirs that Nimazine-7 exceeded all her expectations for precision in affecting specific brain areas. The drug could not simply erase memories, it could erase them selectively, leaving neighboring neural networks untouched and preserving the patient's general personality structure. Nimazine-7's action principle was based on blocking specific neurotransmitters responsible for information transfer between different hippocampus and neocortex areas. Drug molecules had a unique structure, allowing them to selectively bind with receptors activated only when reproducing certain types of memories, those formed under strong emotional stress or secrecy conditions. This meant the drug primarily affected memories of traumatic events, secret operations, and confidential information, leaving memories of daily life and personal relationships relatively untouched. Dr. Harrington explained this effect by saying, "Stressful memories are encoded in the brain using special biochemical markers that make them vulnerable to our drug." Nimazine-7 trials were conducted on volunteers from CIA staff who agreed to experiments in exchange for significant monetary compensation and medical care guarantees. Results exceeded all expectations. The drug allowed selective erasure of memories about specific operations while preserving agents' professional skills and general knowledge. One test subject, an agent with 15 years of experience in the Latin American department, after a course of injections, completely forgot his participation in Nicaragua operations, but retained Spanish language knowledge and fieldwork skills. Another volunteer forgot all details of a secret Afghanistan mission, including agent names and base locations, but perfectly remembered his previous work and personal life. These results convinced CIA leadership that the drug was perfect for solving the Reagan problem. Application of Nimazine-7 to the former president began in May 1994 under the guise of innovative therapy to slow Alzheimer's disease progression. Dr. Martinez received a specially adapted version of the drug disguised as a B vitamin complex, supposedly improving brain circulation and supporting cognitive functions. Injections were given 3 times weekly, and with each dose, new fragments of Reagan's presidential past disappeared from his memory. First, memories of meetings with Contra commanders vanished, then details of negotiations with Iranian representatives were erased, then drug trafficking financing schemes were forgotten. The process was so gradual and natural that Reagan himself didn't notice memory loss until he tried to recall specific details of his presidency. A special feature of Nimazine-7 was that it didn't simply block access to memories. It physically destroyed neural connections encoding them. This meant erased memories couldn't be restored by any known methods, including hypnosis or brain stimulation. Dr. Harrington developed the drug so destruction occurred at cellular level, mimicking natural brain aging processes. During pathological anatomical examination, brain tissue changes would look like results of progressive neurodegenerative disease rather than consequences of chemical influence. "We created the perfect memory assassination weapon," Harrington wrote in her laboratory journal. "The victim loses the ability to remember, but retains the ability to live, creating an illusion of natural aging with complete control over what exactly will be forgotten." Drug application coordination was carried out through encrypted communication between Dr. Martinez and the operation curator, known as archivist. Each week, Martinez received detailed instructions about which specific memories should be erased in the next injection series. Target lists were compiled based on analysis of Reagan's statements recorded by the surveillance system in his house. When the former president began talking about any compromising episode, that episode immediately went on the cleanup list for the following week. Thus, Reagan's memory was systematically cleared of all information that could threaten national security. Archivist also ensured erasure wasn't too sharp or noticeable, adjusting dosages and time intervals between injections to create an illusion of natural disease development. The most cynical aspect of Namazin 7 application was that the drug caused Reagan to feel relief and peace, along with heavy memories, associated anxiety, guilt, and psychological tension that had tormented the former president for years after his term ended disappeared. This side effect was foreseen by the drug's creators. By erasing traumatic memories, Namazin 7 automatically eliminated associated negative emotions, making the victim happier and less inclined to attempt memory restoration. Thus, Reagan not only lost the ability to tell compromising truth, but stopped wanting to do so, becoming an ideal former president, a kind, harmless old man who remembered only good things and forgot everything that could cause pain to himself or his country. Daniel Harris, veteran investigative journalist at Washington Post with 20 years' experience, never supposed that a routine article about politicians' health would lead him to one of the most dangerous investigations of his career. In November 1994, preparing material about presidential stress effects on former leaders' health, he requested medical documents of several former presidents for comparative analysis. When Ronald Reagan's documents reached his desk, the experienced journalist's eye immediately noticed inconsistencies that didn't fit the standard Alzheimer's disease development pattern. Dementia symptom records appeared in medical charts too suddenly, without the gradual memory and cognitive function problem increase characteristic of this disease. Moreover, doctors' handwriting in early forgetfulness records differed from their usual writing style, and some record dates were made with different shade ink. The first serious suspicion arose from discovering that the Alzheimer's diagnosis was made by Dr. Carlos Martinez, who had never before specialized in neurodegenerative diseases. Studying Martinez's biography, Harris discovered he obtained his neurology practice license just 2 months before diagnosing Reagan, having completed accelerated retraining at a private medical center connected to government structures. Even more suspicious was that Martinez never published scientific works on Alzheimer's disease, didn't participate in relevant conferences, and wasn't a member of any professional neurologist associations. A person who never dealt with dementia suddenly becomes the main expert on the country's most high-profile Alzheimer's case. That's too strange a coincidence, Harris wrote in his notebook. Deepening his investigation, Harris turned to independent experts who agreed to anonymously analyze Reagan's medical documents. Dr. Margaret Stone, leading Alzheimer's specialist from Stanford University, was stunned by clinical picture inconsistencies. "These symptoms don't develop so quickly and don't manifest in such sequence," she explained to Harris during a confidential meeting. "Alzheimer's disease usually begins with short-term memory impairment, while long-term memories are preserved for years. Mr. Reagan shows the reverse picture. He remembers childhood details but forgets events from 20 years ago." Dr. Stone also noted strange memory loss selectivity. The patient forgets professional memories but preserves personal ones. This looks more like selective amnesia than organic brain damage. The investigation breakthrough occurred when Harris received an anonymous tip from a source in medical circles who told him about secret drugs for memory influence. The informant, introducing himself only as Deep Throat 2, told the journalist about CIA developments in chemical neurotransmitter influence and about substances capable of selectively erasing certain types of memories. "What's happening to Reagan isn't a natural disease," the source reported during a secret meeting in an underground garage. "His memory is being subjected to purposeful chemical influence to destroy compromising memories about his presidency." The informant also mentioned the existence of a drug under codename Mnemosine, tested on prisoners and volunteers from intelligence service staff. Harris's attempts to get comments from officials met a wall of silence and hidden hostility. Clinton administration representatives refused to discuss the former president's medical condition, citing medical information confidentiality. Dr. Martinez didn't answer calls and letters, and his secretary reported he was temporarily unavailable for interviews. When Harris tried to meet with Reagan family members, he was refused under the pretext that the family is going through a difficult period and isn't ready for press communication. Particularly suspicious was the reaction of Security Service agent Michael Collins, who during a brief phone conversation warned the journalist that some topics are better not touched in national security interests. The situation changed sharply when Harris received his first warning. Returning home late at night after meeting with a CIA source, he discovered his apartment lock had been broken and someone had obviously been inside, though nothing was stolen. On his desk lay a note with a single phrase: "Some stories are too dangerous to tell." The next day, the newspaper's editor-in-chief called Harris and reported receiving calls from high-ranking government sources requesting investigation cessation for national security reasons. "Daniel, I understand your interest in this story, but we need to be careful," the editor said. "There are things that go beyond ordinary journalism." Despite pressure, Harris decided to continue investigating, but now acted with maximum secrecy, using encrypted communication channels and meeting sources only in crowded places. The last straw was an incident with his car. The brake system suddenly failed during a mountain road trip, and only a miracle saved the journalist from a fatal accident. Examination showed brake fluid was professionally drained without leaving sabotage traces. That same day, Harris received a phone call from a stranger who reported, "This was a warning. Next time we won't be so lenient." Understanding his life was in danger, the journalist decided to temporarily suspend investigation, but hid all collected materials in a bank vault with instructions to transfer them to other journalists in case of his death. "The truth about Reagan will eventually come out," he wrote in his last diary entry on this case. "They can force me to be silent, but they can't kill the truth itself." Harris's investigation materials remained unpublished, but they laid the foundation for future attempts to reveal the truth about what really happened to the 41st president's memory. In classified Central Intelligence Agency archives, the operation bore the official name Project Summer, a harmless code name that didn't arouse suspicion even among employees with access to secret documents. But among the narrow circle of initiates, it was known as Operation Oblivion, a large-scale program for neutralizing information threats to national security through medical influence on compromising information carriers. Operation Creation was officially approved in March 1993 at a closed National Security Council meeting attended by only 5 people: CIA Director, Presidential National Security Advisor, Attorney General, Defense Secretary, and President Bill Clinton himself. The meeting protocol was destroyed immediately after signing, but a copy was preserved in one participant's personal safe, which years later became the basis for understanding the conspiracy's true scale. Operation Oblivion was designed as an alternative to physical elimination of problematic witnesses, a method becoming increasingly risky in an era of independent media and public oversight. The concept was simple and brilliant simultaneously. Instead of killing inconvenient people, they were deprived of the ability to remember compromising information, turning them into living vegetables incapable of harming the state machine. The plan provided 3 stages of influence. First, selective erasure of dangerous memories using chemical drugs. Second, creating a credible medical legend to explain memory loss. Third, permanent control over the subject to prevent accidental memory restoration. Ronald Reagan became the first major target of the operation, but CIA plans extended far beyond one former president. A secret document titled Operation Oblivion Priority Target List contained 37 names of high-ranking politicians, military personnel, and intelligence officers who posed a potential threat to national security with their knowledge of past secret operations. After Reagan, the list included former CIA Director William Casey, who knew too many details of Central American and Middle Eastern operations. Third was General Manuel Antonio Noriega, former Panamanian dictator who possessed compromising information about American intelligence connections with drug cartels. The list also included several congressmen who participated in secret CIA investigation committees, journalists investigating the Iran-Contra scandal, and former agents threatening to write memoirs. Each name was accompanied by a detailed dossier indicating specific information to be erased and proposed influence methods. Particular interest was drawn to the operation's target coding system using solar system planet names. Reagan went under code name Saturn, a planet with rings symbolizing cyclical nature of presidential powers. William Casey was Mars, god of war, reflecting his role in CIA military operations. Noriega received code name Pluto, the most distant and cold planet, emphasizing his isolated position in American prison. Each planet had a detailed colonization plan, medical intervention to achieve necessary memory loss levels. The plan for Saturn provided complete erasure of presidential period memories while preserving personality and basic life skills. The plan for Mars was more radical and included creating symptoms imitating brain tumor with subsequent fatal outcome. The plan for Pluto assumed accidental psychotropic drug overdose in prison hospital. Operation Oblivion financing was carried out through a network of front organizations and charitable foundations formerly engaged in Alzheimer's disease and other neurodegenerative disease research. The main funding source was the America Memory Research Foundation, which received government grants totaling over $100 million annually. Money was used to pay corrupt doctors, purchase experimental drugs, maintain secret laboratories, and bribe officials who could interfere with the operation. A special expense item provided family compensation, generous payments to victims' relatives for silence and cooperation with official disease versions. The Reagan family received through various channels more than $5 million in the form of charitable donations and medical research participation fees. The most sinister aspect of Operation Oblivion was developing an emergency circumstances protocol in case any victim began recovering memory or if the operation was exposed. The protocol provided immediate physical elimination of compromised subjects under the guise of underlying disease complications or accidents. For each planet, an individual liquidation scenario was developed. Saturn was supposed to die from heart attack during one of his public appearances, Mars from sudden brain tumor progression, Pluto from prison fight with fatal outcome. Documents also mentioned a replacement list, a roster of specialists ready to replace compromised operation performers at any moment. This list included doctors, agents, and even medical examiners prepared to confirm any death version for appropriate compensation. Operation Oblivion represented not just a plan to eliminate individual witnesses, but a systematic program to rewrite history by destroying its carrier's memory. On the morning of February 23, 1995, Ronald Reagan woke with unusual mental clarity he hadn't experienced for several months. The fog enveloping his consciousness recently seemed to dissipate, and the former president horrifyingly realized what had been happening to his memory. He remembered fragments of conversations with Dr. Martinez about special drugs, recalled strange injections supposedly meant to slow disease development, and suddenly understood his memory wasn't disappearing naturally. It was being purposefully erased. Sitting in his study at 7 a.m. while the rest of the house still slept, Reagan feverishly tried to restore recent months' events and understand who was behind this monstrous conspiracy. Time worked against him. He knew clarity could disappear at any moment, and he had only a few hours to take action. In this moment of enlightenment, Reagan remembered details that seemed lost forever. Phoenix operation bank account numbers, CIA agent names in Central America, records of meetings with cartel leaders. But most importantly, he remembered the existence of a hiding place he created during his presidency in case someone tried to silence him. In his ranch basement, behind a false wall, he hid copies of the most compromising documents, audio recordings of secret conversations, and video materials that could expose the true scale of 80s illegal operations. Reagan understood that if he didn't take decisive action now, this information could be lost forever, and with it, the last opportunity to restore justice. He had to find a way to transfer the hiding place location to someone trustworthy without attracting attention from those watching his every step. The only person Reagan decided to trust was Father Michael O'Brien, a Catholic priest who had been his spiritual mentor for over 20 years and regularly visited the ranch for private conversations. O'Brien was one of the few people Agent Collins couldn't prohibit from visiting, since spiritual support for the sick was considered his inalienable right. Reagan knew the priest was bound by confession secrecy and couldn't disclose received information without his consent, but could preserve it and transfer it to the right people at the right time. When O'Brien arrived for his usual weekly meeting at 2 p.m., the former president asked to remain alone for an important conversation. Collins, as usual, positioned himself in the adjacent room with listening equipment turned on, but Reagan was prepared for this. Using acting skills honed through decades of Hollywood work, Reagan performed a confession spectacle before O'Brien, encoding vital information within it. Speaking about youth sins and past mistakes, he transmitted the hiding place's exact coordinates to the priest using biblical allegories and metaphors understandable only to them. "Father, I remember my childhood home, where under the stairway leading to heaven, treasures were kept that could save many sinners," Reagan said, meaning his ranch basement stairs and hidden documents. He spoke of 30 pieces of silver hidden in Judas's house northern wall, a hint at 33 secret bank accounts whose information was stored in the hiding place's northern section. O'Brien, understanding something unusual was happening, carefully memorized every word using his phenomenal memory developed through years of religious text study. The riskiest moment was transferring the hiding place key to the priest, a small copper object disguised as a religious medal. Reagan asked O'Brien to bless his family relic, and during the blessing secretly transferred the key, hiding it among the priest's rosary beads. "This medal belonged to my mother," he said loudly enough for Collins to hear. "I want you to preserve it and pass it to my grandchildren when I die." O'Brien, without showing he understood what was really happening, solemnly accepted the relic and promised to fulfill the former president's request. At this moment, Reagan felt clarity beginning to leave his consciousness. The next dose of Namazin 7 was starting to take effect, and he understood there was no more time. Reagan's last act in his escape from the golden cage was attempting to leave a written message that could serve as proof of his sanity at this critical moment. While O'Brien read prayers, the former president quickly wrote on a piece of paper, "Today, February 23, 1995, I, Ronald Wilson Reagan, in sound mind and firm memory, declare that my illness is a lie. I am being poisoned with drugs that erase memory. I know the truth about what happened in the 80s, and this truth is hidden where only Father Michael can find it. May God forgive us all our sins." He managed to pass the note to the priest just before Collins entered the room, announcing, "Visit time has expired." O'Brien secretly hid the note in his prayer book and bid farewell to Reagan, who already began looking confused and forgetful. Leaving the ranch, the priest understood he had just witnessed one of the most terrible crimes in American political history, and now he bore enormous responsibility for preserving truth that could change the course of history. After Reagan's meeting with Father O'Brien, the electronic surveillance system in the House recorded anomalous activity by the former president, and CIA analysts sounded the alarm. Though conversation content was disguised as religious confession, behavior analysis, specialists noticed Reagan demonstrated signs of unusual mental clarity and purposeful action. On February 24, 1995, at CIA headquarters in Langley, the Cleaners Group was activated, an elite unit specializing in eliminating information threats to national security. Group leader, agent under code name Surgeon, received orders to conduct sanitary treatment of all potential compromising information carriers. The hunt began for people who could know or learn the truth about what was happening to the 41st president's memory. The first victim was nurse Susan Coleman, who worked at Dr. Martinez's private clinic and had access to the former president's medical records. 2 weeks before her death, she approached a colleague with questions about strange drugs being administered to Reagan and expressed suspicions about the unusual nature of his disease. On March 3rd, Coleman died in a car accident on a desert Nevada road while driving to visit her sister for the weekend. Examination showed the car lost control due to a burst tire, but independent specialists hired by the family discovered traces of special acid composition on the rubber that could have been applied to weaken the tire. A bag of medical documents that, according to her sister, Susan always took on trips wasn't found in the car trunk. Surgeon personally supervised the Coleman threat neutralization operation using a 3-agent team and high-tech equipment for remote vehicle influence. The next target was Dr. Robert Henderson, independent neurologist from Johns Hopkins Hospital, who agreed to secretly analyze Reagan's medical documents at journalist Daniel Harris's request. Henderson discovered serious inconsistencies in the clinical picture and began preparing an expert conclusion that could question the official diagnosis. On March 15th, the day before his planned meeting with Harris, Dr. Henderson died of sudden heart attack right in his office. Autopsy showed blood traces of a rare plant alkaloid that in small doses isn't detected by standard tests, but can cause cardiac arrest in people predisposed to cardiovascular diseases. All Henderson's research materials disappeared from his office before police arrival, and his computer was erased using professional methods. The doctor's colleagues noted that in recent days he seemed troubled and mentioned pressure from unknown persons. Particularly cynical was the operation to eliminate former CIA agent Thomas Mitchell, who worked in the Latin American department in the 80s and possessed information about connections between Contra operations and drug trafficking. After retirement, Mitchell began writing memoirs and established contact with several journalists interested in the Iran-Contra scandal. Cleaners organized his death in a particularly sophisticated way. During morning jogging in Rock Creek Park in Washington, Mitchell was attacked by a random mugger who allegedly wanted to steal his sneakers and watch. The former agent resisted and received a fatal knife wound to the heart. The robber escaped without taking any of the victim's belongings, allowing police to classify the incident as failed robbery with fatal outcome. In reality, the killer was a professional assassin using a special knife with hollow blade filled with poison to guarantee victim death even with inaccurate strike. The most complex operation was eliminating White House Secretary Margaret Wilson, who worked in Reagan's administration and had access to presidential correspondence and conversation records. After retirement, she kept copies of some documents at home that could shed light on Reagan's true role in illegal operations. Wilson was a cautious and suspicious woman who rarely left home and maintained minimal social contacts. Surgeon developed a special plan for her. Poisonous mold spores were introduced into her house, causing symptoms indistinguishable from severe pneumonia. Margaret fell ill in April and died in hospital 2 weeks later from respiratory infection complications. While she was unconscious in hospital, CIA agents thoroughly searched her house and seized all compromising documents, replacing them with harmless papers. Wilson's relatives suspected nothing unusual about her death, attributing it to age and chronic diseases. The culmination of the truth hunt was an attempt to eliminate journalist Daniel Harris himself, who continued investigating despite warnings and threats. Cleaners developed a complex operation that was supposed to look like journalist suicide, whose depressive state was caused by professional failures and personal problems. Devices spraying psychotropic substances were installed in Harris's apartment to induce deep depression and suicidal thoughts. Simultaneously, agents spread rumors among the journalist's colleagues about his emotional instability and financial problems. The plan provided that in a state of chemically induced depression, Harris would commit suicide, leaving a suicide note with apologies for false accusations against respected people. However, the journalist suspected something wrong when he began experiencing unexplained attacks of melancholy and apathy, and left his apartment to stay with friends under a fictitious name. This allowed him to avoid death, but forced him to finally stop investigating and hide from pursuers. Surgeon reported to leadership that sanitary treatment was conducted successfully, though Harris remained alive since his silence was guaranteed by fear for his own life. 3 months after meeting with Father O'Brien, the priest decided to penetrate Reagan's hiding place using encoded information received from the former president during his moment of clarity. On May 27, 1995, waiting for the moment when the Reagan family went to Los Angeles and Agent Collins was temporarily absent, O'Brien entered the ranch basement under the guise of inspecting premises for conducting a charity event. Following instructions encrypted in biblical metaphors, he found the false wall in the basement's northern section and, using the copper key, opened the secret storage. What he discovered inside exceeded all his expectations. The metal box contained not only official documents and audio recordings, but Reagan's personal diary, which the former president kept secretly throughout all 8 years of his White House tenure. This diary proved to be the most detailed and candid testimony about the dark operations of the American government in the 80s. Reagan's diary entries began from his presidency's first days and demonstrated evolution of his understanding of power's true nature in the United States. In an entry from February 15, 1981, he wrote, "Today, Director Casey explained to me that the president doesn't govern the country. He only signs decisions already made by those who really hold power. It turns out there's a shadow government that determines foreign policy regardless of elected representatives' will." As he deepened into presidential duties, Reagan increasingly realized he had become a puppet in the hands of the intelligence community, which used his charisma and popularity to cover their illegal operations. In an entry from September 23, 1982, he noted, "I signed a document without understanding its true meaning. Now it turns out I gave permission for drug trafficking to finance Contras. When I tried to revoke permission, they explained it was impossible. Too many people were already involved in the operation." Particularly candid were Reagan's diary entries about his meetings with cartel leaders and organized crime representatives. The diary detailed secret negotiations in the White House with people officially considered enemies of the American state. An entry from March 12, 1984, contained shocking details. "Today, I received Pablo Escobar in the Oval Office. Officially, he wasn't here. The meeting was held under the guise of receiving Colombian businessmen. Escobar proposed increasing cocaine supplies to American cities by 20% in exchange for safety guarantees for his Panama operations. Casey insisted I agree. They told me drug money was needed to fight communism in Latin America. God, what have I turned my presidency into?" These entries contained exact dates, meeting participant names, and agreement details that never appeared in any official documents. Reagan's most prophetic entries concerned his premonitions about his own future fate. Already in 1986, he began fearing his knowledge of illegal operations would make him a dangerous witness after presidency ended. In an entry from November 8, 1986, made immediately after Iran-Contra scandal investigation began, he wrote, "Today, Casey hinted. I know too much for an ordinary former president. He said there are ways to make people forget unpleasant past episodes. When I asked what he meant, he replied, 'Mr. President, medicine today works miracles. You can cure a person of unwanted memories just like any other disease.'" Reagan also recorded details of conversation with an unknown doctor who visited the White House under the guise of presidential health consultant, but actually spoke about new methods of memory influence using chemical drugs. In the diary's last entries, dated January 1989, Reagan demonstrated clear understanding of what awaited him after presidency ended. "I created this hiding place as insurance against those who will try to silence me," he wrote. "If something happens to me, if I suddenly fall ill or lose memory, these documents must tell the truth about what happened in the 80s. I cannot allow history to judge me as a weak president who didn't know what was happening in his administration. I knew everything but was powerless to stop the machine I myself started." Reagan also left detailed instructions on how to use the hiding place contents, whom to trust with this information, which media to transfer it to, and how to protect people who decide to expose the truth. He foresaw that any exposure attempts would meet fierce resistance from intelligence services and warned in advance about possible threats to potential whistleblowers' lives. The most striking document in the hiding place was a letter addressed to future generations of Americans. In this letter, Reagan asked forgiveness from his fellow citizens for allowing American democracy to be turned into a facade for shadow government activities. "I became president, believing I could change the system from within," he wrote, "but the system changed me. I became an accomplice to crimes that contradict all principles on which our country is founded. If you're reading this letter, it means truth has finally come out. Let my story be a warning about how easily democracy can turn into dictatorship if citizens stop controlling their elected officials." Father O'Brien, reading the diary and letter, understood he held documents that could change Americans' understanding of their history and government. but he also understood that publicizing this information would endanger many people's lives, including his own and the remains of Reagan's family. By autumn 1995, Dr. Carlos Martinez was on the verge of nervous breakdown. Each injection of Nimazine 7 he administered to Ronald Reagan became an increasingly difficult moral test. Watching memories of the most important events of his life gradually disappear from the former president's memory, the doctor began doubting the correctness of his actions. Particularly agonizing were moments when Reagan, between injections, showed glimpses of clarity and asked, "Doctor, why can't I remember what happened during my presidency? Is the disease really developing so quickly?" Martinez was forced to lie, explaining memory loss as Alzheimer's progression, but each such lie caused him physical pain. At night he lay sleepless, pondering how a doctor who swore to do no harm became an instrument of human personality destruction. The turning point came during an incident on October 7th, when Reagan suddenly grabbed the doctor's hand during another procedure and said with unexpected clarity, "Carlos, I know what you're doing to me. You're not treating me. You're killing my memory piece by piece. Tell me the truth. Who's forcing you to do this?" At this moment, Martinez saw in the former president's eyes not the confusion of an Alzheimer's patient, but clear understanding of the situation and a plea for help. The doctor tried to maintain professional calm and assured the patient all procedures were for his benefit, but something inside him finally broke. That evening, he cried for the first time in many months, sitting in his office after work ended. "I've become an executioner," he wrote in his personal diary. "Reagan understands what's happening to him, but I continue destroying his mind for those blackmailing me with compromising material." Martinez's attempts to reduce drug dosage or change treatment regimen met rigid resistance from his handlers. Agent under code name Archivist regularly controlled the treatment process and demanded strict adherence to established protocol. When the doctor tried to justify the need for therapy break with medical considerations, Archivist reminded him of compromising materials in his dossier and added new threats. "Doctor, we've invested too many resources in this project to allow you to sabotage it because of conscience attacks," he said coldly during a late October meeting. "Remember that your family's safety directly depends on Mr. Reagan's treatment success. To reinforce his words with actions, handlers showed Martinez photographs of his wife and children taken by hidden camera near their house and school. The message was crystal clear. Any attempts to deviate from the plan would endanger his loved ones' lives. Despite threats, Martinez began secretly seeking ways to minimize harm to the patient. He studied neuropharmacology scientific literature, searching for antidotes or neutralizing substances that could weaken Nimazine 7's effect. Experimental drugs appeared in his laboratory that theoretically could slow neural connection destruction or stimulate damaged brain area restoration. Under the guise of additional vitamin therapy, he began administering small doses of neuroprotectors to Reagan, substances protecting nerve cells from damage. He made these injections secretly during official procedures, hoping they would help preserve at least part of the former president's memory. "Perhaps I can't stop destruction, but I'll try to slow it," he wrote in encrypted notes. "If someday a way to restore memory is found, these drugs might prove decisive." Martinez's most dangerous step was attempting to create detailed medical documentation about Reagan's true condition and memory influence methods. Understanding that sooner or later truth would come out, he began keeping parallel medical records where he recorded real data about experimental drug application, their dosages and effects. He stored these documents in a bank vault under a fictitious name, planning to someday use them as evidence of coercion and attempt to rehabilitate his reputation. In secret records, he detailed Nimazine 7's action mechanism, its side effects and long-term consequences for the patient's brain. "This drug doesn't simply erase memories," he wrote. "It physically destroys brain areas responsible for storing certain types of information. The process is irreversible, and with each injection, we kill part of a person's personality." The culmination of Martinez's internal struggle was his attempt to contact independent journalists and human rights organizations. In December 1995, he established contact with Los Angeles Times editorial staff through an intermediary and hinted he possessed information about medical experiments on high-ranking political figures. However, his exposure attempt was nipped in the bud. Archivist somehow learned about contact with journalists and organized a cruel show of force. The doctor's youngest son, 10-year-old Miguel, was kidnapped for 3 days, then returned with a note. Next time the boy might not come home. Martinez understood that any resistance attempts would endanger his children's lives and ceased all contact with the outside world. "I became a prisoner of my own conscience," he wrote in his last diary entry. "Continuing to treat Reagan, I destroy him, but refusing treatment will destroy my family. This is a choice between 2 types of murder, and I don't know which is less sinful." From this moment, Dr. Martinez completely submitted to curator demands, but his internal agony continued growing daily, turning him into a victim of the operation he helped carry out. On May 27, 2004, a week before Ronald Reagan's death, a meeting occurred in his house that forever changed understanding of 80s history. Daniel Harris, the journalist forced to stop investigating 9 years earlier under death threat, received an anonymous call from someone introducing himself as a friend of truth. The caller reported having a way to arrange a secret meeting with the former president, who was in terminal disease stage, but periodically experienced moments of clarity when years of chemical therapy temporarily weakened. "Reagan is dying, and his brain no longer responds to drugs as before," the mysterious informant explained. "You have one last chance to hear truth firsthand, but time is very short." Harris understood this could be a trap, but a decade of silence and sense of incompleteness forced him to agree to the risk. The meeting was organized with help from Father Michael O'Brien, who over years of keeping Reagan's secret concluded that truth must be told before the former president's death. The priest used his right to spiritual visits to bring Harris into the house, disguised as an assistant, helping prepare final religious ceremonies. Agent Collins, aged and less vigilant after 10 years of service, didn't suspect deception in the new face appearing in the priest's entourage. Harris was shocked by Reagan's appearance. The once charismatic and energetic politician had become an emaciated old man with empty gaze who spent most time sitting in a chair staring into space. But O'Brien assured the journalist that at certain moments, especially early morning, the former president's consciousness cleared and he could speak coherently about the past. The miracle happened on Harris's visit's 3rd day. Early morning, when the rest of the house still slept, Reagan suddenly looked at the journalist with meaningful gaze and said, "You're the person who tried to tell the truth about me 10 years ago. They forced you to be silent, but now they don't care. I'm dying." The former president's voice was weak, but his speech surprisingly clear and coherent. Harris turned on a hidden recorder and began asking questions that had tormented him for years. "Mr. President, what really happened to your memory? Did you really have Alzheimer's disease?" Reagan slowly shook his head and answered, "Alzheimer's was a cover. They poisoned me with drugs that erased my memories of what I knew about their operations. Every week, new pieces of the past disappeared from my head until I became an empty shell." For the next 2 hours, Reagan told oblivion operation details with surprising accuracy, as if years of chemical influence suddenly retreated, allowing him access to deeply hidden memories. He named all conspiracy participant names, described drug action mechanisms, told about Dr. Martinez's coercion and Agent Collins's role in controlling his life. "They didn't just steal my memory," he said bitterly. "They stole my ability to bear responsibility for what I did as president. I should have told the American people the truth about what happened in the 80s. But instead, they turned me into a helpless old man who can't remember his own crimes." Reagan also spoke about the document hiding place existence and transferring its key to Father O'Brien during one clarity moment 10 years ago. The most shocking revelations concerned oblivion operation scale and number of people eliminated or neutralized to preserve secrecy. "They killed everyone who could tell the truth," Reagan said, naming dozens of journalists, doctors, agents, and politicians who died under suspicious circumstances. "Eduardo Mendoza, who flew from Nicaragua with evidence of our participation in drug trafficking, nurse Susan Coleman, who suspected something wrong with my treatment, Dr. Henderson, who analyzed my medical records. They're all dead because they tried to tell what they knew." The victim list Reagan provided included over 50 people who died between 1994 and 2004 under circumstances officially considered accidents, suicides, or natural deaths. At interview's end, Reagan handed Harris a letter he wrote with trembling hand the night before the meeting during one of his rare clarity moments. "This is my testament to the American people," he said. "I ask forgiveness for allowing our democracy to be turned into a facade for shadow government activities. I was a weak president who couldn't oppose those who used my power for their criminal purposes. But even weakness doesn't justify silence about crimes. Let my story be a warning about what happens when citizens stop controlling their elected officials." After these words, Reagan again sank into prostration and never again showed signs of clear consciousness until his death. Harris left the House with a recording containing the most dangerous secrets of American politics, understanding his life was again under threat, but this time he was ready to risk everything for truth to finally see light. After Ronald Reagan's death on June 5, 2004, the former president's family found themselves at the center of a sophisticated psychological pressure campaign aimed at ensuring their silence about the true circumstances of his illness. The day after the funeral, Nancy Reagan received a visit from an elegant middle-aged man who introduced himself as a representative of the President Reagan Heritage Foundation and offered the family generous funding to create memorial projects in memory of the deceased. "Mrs. Reagan, your husband deserves to be remembered as a great president who led America to victory in the Cold War," the stranger said in a soft but insistent tone. "It would be tragic if his legacy were overshadowed by speculation and rumors from people who don't understand government complexity." The offer included $50 million for creating Reagan's library, scholarship programs for his grandchildren, and lifetime financial support for all family members. Simultaneously with financial support offers, the family received subtle but unmistakable threats regarding the deceased president's reputation. Reagan's children were shown drafts of articles and documentaries presenting their father as a corrupt politician involved in drug trafficking and illegal terrorist group financing. These materials will never see light if the family adheres to the official version of the president's illness, the foundation representative explained. But if any of Ronald's relatives begin spreading alternative theories about his condition, we won't be able to control information flows. To demonstrate threat seriousness, several compromising articles were published in marginal publications, then quickly withdrawn from sale. The family was made to understand this was only a small part of the compromising material that could be made public in case of their disobedience. Michael Reagan, who continued asking questions about his father's medical treatment and expressing doubts about the official version of his illness, faced particularly cruel pressure. In August 2004, his private business suddenly faced a series of inspections from tax authorities, sanitary services, and labor inspection. Simultaneously, several major clients terminated contracts under far-fetched pretexts, bringing Michael's company to bankruptcy's edge. "This is just a coincidence," the foundation representative explained during another visit. "But such coincidences tend to happen to people who ask too many uncomfortable questions." When Michael tried to seek help from lawyers, he discovered most major law firms refused to represent his interests, citing conflict of interest with other clients. Only after he publicly declared support for the official version of his father's illness did business problems mysteriously disappear. Patty Davis, the most independent of Reagan's children, faced threats of another kind. Her publisher suddenly refused to publish her memoirs about life in the president's family, explaining this as market conditions change. When she tried to find another publisher, it turned out the manuscript was blocked by a lawsuit from an unknown party claiming the book contained libelous information about living people. Legal battles dragged on for months and cost Patty tens of thousands of dollars she didn't have. Simultaneously, media began featuring information about her past drug problems and psychiatric treatment, undermining her credibility as a witness. Miss Davis always distinguished herself with emotional instability and inclination toward conspiracy theories, anonymous sources commented in the press. Her claims about her father's illness should be considered in the context of her own psychological problems. The most sophisticated psychological pressure was applied to Nancy Reagan, who, as the deceased president's widow, had the greatest authority for public statements about his illness. She was shown sociological poll results showing most Americans continued considering her husband one of the greatest presidents in the country's history. "Mrs. Reagan, you have a choice," the foundation representative explained. "Your husband can remain in people's memory as a hero who defeated communism and returned America's faith in itself. Or he can become a character in scandalous exposures, presenting him as a corrupt politician and victim of his own naivety." Nancy was also reminded that her own reputation as a devoted wife could suffer if it became known she hid her husband's true condition from the public for years. Particularly painful was the hint that she could be accused of complicity in deceiving voters if it became known she knew about medical manipulations with the president's memory. The pressure campaign culmination was a visit to Nancy by a former CIA director who personally explained the scale of national security threat that oblivion operation exposure could represent. "Mrs. Reagan, your husband served his country even after presidency ended, agreeing to sacrifice part of his memories to protect state secrets," he said in solemn tone. "If truth about his treatment becomes known, this will undermine American people's trust in power institutions and could lead to constitutional crisis." She was also explained that information disclosure would endanger hundreds of agents and informants worldwide and could provoke international scandals, weakening America's positions on the world stage. "The choice is yours," the former director concluded. "One family's personal truth or the entire nation's security." Under weight of these arguments and threats, Nancy Reagan decided never to publicly discuss doubts about her husband's illness, becoming the last guardian of a secret that could change Americans' understanding of their history. In March 2021, National Archives employee James Connolly stumbled upon an anomaly in the document classification system that led to one of the most significant exposures in American intelligence history. Working on a routine project to declassify 70s CIA files, Connolly discovered references in the computer database to documents with codename Project Summer, dated to the 90s but mistakenly placed in earlier materials archive. Attempting to access these files, he encountered unusually high secrecy levels in multiple protection systems not corresponding to standard archiving practice. Intrigued, Connolly used his administrative privileges for deeper search and discovered Project Summer was merely a code name for the much more sinister Oblivion operation, whose documents were considered destroyed in the early 2000s. The breakthrough occurred when Connolly discovered one of the archive's computer servers contained backup copies of files that should have been deleted but were preserved due to technical error in automatic backup system. These files included complete Oblivion operation documentation, from initial plans and budget requests to operation progress reports and eliminated witness lists. Particularly striking were Dr. Martinez's medical reports detailedly describing the chemical memory influence process on Reagan, including exact drug dosages, their effects on different brain areas, and planned schedule for erasing specific memories. Documents also contained audio recordings of conversations between operation participants, including cynical discussions about which specific Reagan presidency episodes should be forgotten first. The most shocking discovery was the found Operation Oblivion target list, containing not only Reagan's name, but 36 other high-ranking politicians, military personnel, and intelligence officers subject to neutralization by various methods. Next to each name were marks about execution status: completed for those successfully eliminated or deprived of memory, in progress for those under surveillance, and postponed for those whose neutralization was deemed inadvisable. Connolly horrifyingly discovered many people from the list indeed died under suspicious circumstances or were diagnosed with various dementia forms between 1993 and 2010. Among successfully completed cases were former CIA Director William Casey, several congressmen participating in Iran-Contra scandal investigation, and journalists digging through 80s archives. Particularly detailed was medical operation aspect documentation, including secret trial results of Namazin 7 drug on federal prison inmates and CIA staff volunteers. Files contained video recordings of experiments showing test subjects losing ability to remember specific life events after drug administration, while preserving general skills and basic memories. Dr. Elizabeth Harrington, medical project leader, proudly described achievements in selective memory erasure in her reports and plans to use technology for intelligence community personnel optimization. Documents also mentioned plans to apply similar methods to prisoners of war and political dissidents in other countries under democracy export programs. Connally also discovered financial documents revealing corruption scale connected to Oblivion operation. Project total cost exceeded $500 million, spent not only on drug development and medical equipment, but also on bribing doctors, journalists, judges, and politicians. Special expense item provided family compensation, essentially bribes to victims' relatives for silence about suspicious circumstances of their loved ones' illnesses and deaths. Reagan's family received over $10 million through various front organizations between 2004 and 2015. Money came as fees for participating in Alzheimer's disease research, donations to charitable projects, and payment for consulting services on medical ethics issues. The most sinister document was a final cleanup plan developed in case of possible operation exposure. The plan provided physical elimination of all surviving project participants, including medical personnel, cover agents, and even some high-ranking curators who could become inconvenient witnesses. The subject to liquidation list included over 100 people, many of whom indeed died under mysterious circumstances between 2010 and 2015. Dr. Carlos Martinez, main executor of the operation's medical part, died in a car accident in 2012, just a week after attempting to contact journalists to testify about his project participation. Agent Michael Collins died of heart attack in 2014 on the eve of a planned meeting with lawyers for one victim's family. Archivist himself, operation coordinator, disappeared without trace in 2016, and his fate remains unknown. Connally's discovery of these documents became the beginning of the largest scandal in American intelligence history, but also endangered the lives of all involved in their disclosure. In September 2021, Washington Post published a series of articles titled "Stolen Memory: How CIA Killed the President's Mind," based on documents transferred by James Connally and recording of Reagan's last interview kept by journalist Daniel Harris. Publication shocked not only America but the entire world, questioning democratic institutions' foundations and citizens' trust in their government. On the first day, articles were read by more than 50 million people, and #RealReagan became most popular on social networks. President Joe Biden was forced to urgently call a press conference where he announced creation of an independent commission to investigate accusations, but emphasized these claims concern events from 30 years ago and don't reflect modern American intelligence practice. However, the public demanded not just investigation, but complete revision of intelligence community activities over recent decades. Reagan family reaction proved unexpectedly contradictory. Nancy Reagan, who died in 2016, took her secrets to the grave, but her diaries discovered after death confirmed many details outlined in articles. Michael Reagan issued a statement acknowledging he always suspected something unnatural was happening to Father and demanded body exhumation for modern brain tissue expertise. Patty Davis confirmed Father indeed demonstrated strange memory lapses not corresponding to Alzheimer's disease clinical picture. However, Ron Reagan Jr. publicly doubted accusation credibility, stating sensational conspiracy theories shouldn't overshadow a great president's memory. This position raised suspicions he continued receiving financial support from structures interested in concealing truth. Government reaction was swift and harsh. CIA Director William Burns categorically rejected all accusations, calling them conspiracy theorist fantasies based on forged documents. Justice Department began investigation against James Connally on charges of disclosing state secrets and illegal access to classified archives. Connally was arrested but found dead in detention cell 2 days later under circumstances officially classified as suicide. However, independent expertise conducted by the family showed signs of struggle and violence application. Daniel Harris, fearing for his life, fled to Europe and received political asylum in Switzerland, from where he continued publishing additional materials about American intelligence activities. Father Michael O'Brien disappeared without trace a month after article publication, and his whereabouts remain unknown. Public reaction divided American society into two irreconcilable camps. Conspiracy theory supporters organized mass demonstrations at CIA headquarters in Langley, demanding complete archive declassification and prosecution of all involved in Oblivion Operation. Accusation opponents claimed publications were part of a campaign to discredit American institutions organized by hostile states. Congress was paralyzed by political battles between Democrats demanding special commission creation modeled on September 11th Commission and Republicans blocking any attempts to tarnish the great Republican president's memory. Government trust rating fell to historic minimum, and polls showed over 60% of Americans believed in deep state existence controlling policy regardless of voter will. International reaction proved no less dramatic. European Parliament adopted a resolution condemning medical experiments on political figures and demanded full investigation of accusations from the United States. Russia and China used the scandal to criticize American democracy, declaring so-called democratic values are merely cover for totalitarian regime activities. Several U.S. allies, including Germany and France, expressed serious concern and demanded explanations regarding possible application of similar methods against their country's citizens. Latin American countries' reaction was particularly painful, where Oblivion Operation documents confirmed long-standing suspicions about U.S. role in drug trafficking and paramilitary group financing in the 80s. 3 years after exposure publication, many questions remain unanswered, and most Oblivion Operation participants' fate remains secret. Independent commission created under public pressure works under constant intelligence opposition and has limited archive access. Of 37 people listed as operation targets, 23 died under circumstances of varying suspicion degrees, 8 disappeared without trace, and only 6 remain alive but refuse to testify. Dr. Elizabeth Harrington, Namazan 7 creator, officially committed suicide in 2022, leaving a note apologizing for participating in crimes against humanity. However, experts doubt the note's authenticity and believe she could have been eliminated to prevent testimony. The biggest question remains the drug's fate. Do Namazan 7 supplies exist somewhere, and do memory chemical influence experiments continue? Ronald Reagan's story transformed from political scandal into a symbol of how power can destroy not only human life, but the very ability to remember who he was and what he did. The question of how many more such victims remain unknown continues tormenting American society, which can no longer be certain its leaders' memory belongs to themselves. Ronald Reagan's story became a symbol of how far shadow structures are ready to go to protect their secrets. Oblivion Operation showed that in a world where memory can be erased with one injection and truth can be buried with its carriers, each of us can become a victim of a system considering silence more important than human dignity. The former president, who should have entered history as Cold War victor, became a victim of war against his own memory, a war where the enemy was the very ability to remember truth about what happened in power corridors. Today, when consciousness manipulation technologies have become even more sophisticated and information control possibilities have reached unprecedented scales, Reagan's story reminds us of silence's price and what happens when citizens stop asking uncomfortable questions to their leaders. Perhaps somewhere now a new Oblivion Operation is being prepared, new victims are receiving treatment for unwanted memories, and new witnesses are disappearing, taking with them secrets that could change our understanding of history. And now, for the most important part, ladies and gentlemen, you'll see our latest video on your screen, along with the subscribe button that you should definitely click and a whole playlist of similar stories. Since you've watched all the way to the end, make sure to subscribe and check out either the playlist on the right or the fresh video on the left, whatever interests you more. Thanks.